Hey, I'm Adam, and this is For the Love of It. It's viewers like you that keep this channel going and growing. So if you like today's video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. Be sure to check out our weekly live Q&As on Mondays. And also, don't forget to check out the For the Love podcast, where we have seasons of podcast episodes covering all sorts of fun topics. Love you all, and thanks for joining us today. Now, let's get to the video.
Doing a search for statistics on living alone brings up a litany of results. The most common results appear to be articles referencing census data from the US Census Bureau, which indicates that an average of 30% of American households are composed of a single adult living alone. Writing for The Hill, Daniel Davis remarks that the US Census shows that solitaries make up 8% of all households in 1940. The share of solo households doubled to 18% in 1970. And it more than tripled to an estimated 29% by 2022. Why the dramatic rise? Well, this shift has taken place predominantly alongside other cultural shifts. Americans are either getting married later or not getting married at all, which itself is the result of more women entering the workforce and pursuing careers. An aging population and longer life expectancies are also contributing factors. So, is this a good thing? Well, it depends. According to the CDC, social isolation among the elderly is associated with a roughly 50% increased risk of dementia, a 29% increased risk of heart disease, and a 32% increased risk of stroke. Another report listed in the National Library of Medicine suggested that adults who reported never or rarely receiving social and emotional support and living alone were also twice as likely to report feelings of depression than those never or rarely receiving social and emotional support and living with others. However, not everyone who lives alone suffers from loneliness or depression. Eric Kleinenberg, in his book Going Solo, explores how living alone can foster creativity, self-fulfillment, and deeper social connections, as those who live alone often build among networks of friends, family, and community out of necessity. In her book, Single at Heart, Bella DePaulo explores the concept of being single as a fulfilling and rewarding lifestyle, challenging societal norms that prioritize marriage and coupledom. DePaulo draws on research and personal anecdotes to highlight how being single can offer freedom, autonomy, and deep connections with friends without the need for a romantic partner. What does it feel like to live alone? Does everyone living alone wrestle with depression at some point, or do most people living alone, especially those living alone by choice, gain a sense of freedom and self-discovery? Although I can't speak for everyone and the experiences that they've had, I can certainly speak from my own life. I've lived alone on several occasions, and well, it changed my life. The first time I lived alone was not by choice. The friends I had been rooming with moved away and the lease on our apartment was about to expire. Not capable of paying the lease on my own, I moved into a smaller unit upstairs. The experience was difficult, to say the least. Not only was I not ready to live on my own, but I had already been weathering a storm of anxiety in my life. Having no close community of friends at the time, I was quickly overwhelmed by loneliness. If there was anything I learned during this time, it was the importance of having community in your life, especially when living on your own. And this wouldn't be the first time that I would learn this lesson either. In fact, it's probably the first and one of the most important lessons that I ever learned about living alone. Community isn't optional. After living there for several months, I ultimately found a roommate and moved away. It wouldn't be until about 3 years later that I would once again find myself living alone. This time, however, it was intentional. After 10 years of moving around the country and living in various places for a time, I found myself back in Michigan, where I grew up. After staying with my parents for a time to save money and get back on my feet, I found a small apartment on the second story of an antique shop downtown. Choosing to live on my own was about processing my life. If you've ever been on a long trip, you might know the feeling. There is a strangeness that comes with returning from a long journey. The things you saw, the people you met, and the experiences you shared are all a part of this single isolated story of your life. Yet when you return home, the story is over. For some of us, processing that story is how we ensure that the experience of it never really leaves us. To process means to understand what we've experienced and allow it to transform the way we live our lives in the future. That apartment, to me, was no different. Rather than my journey being a week or so long, that journey was the previous 10 years of my life. Living alone taught me 3 primary lessons about life. 1, it taught me the difference between autonomy and freedom. 2, I learned more about myself and how to focus my sights on who I wanted to be in relationship to the world and others around me. And 3, it showed me what I needed to do in order to get to where I wanted to be. Bella DePaulo, in her book, Single at Heart, uses this term authentic life to describe a way of living that aligns with one's true preferences, desires, and values, rather than conforming to societal pressures or expectations. Living alone lays bare your deeply personal way of thinking and living. There are no roommates to accommodate for, no spouses to consider, no siblings to fight with, no other person to make room for in your home. As a result, we're left to do what we want to do. We can keep the home messy or neatly organized. We can store things wherever we want them to be. Cook however we want to cook, do the laundry however we want to do the laundry, or stay up however late we want to stay up. There is no unspoken structure to the way you're supposed to do things. Your life is a blank canvas, and you can paint it however you want without others getting in your way, with only yourself to blame if things aren't going well. At first, that autonomy was the biggest breath of fresh air that I had ever taken. There was a huge wave of excitement and joy at the world of possibilities. For the first time in my life, I felt free to live how I wanted to live. I could stay up late watching sci-fi movies and eating ice cream until 2 in the morning if I wanted to, which I did. Or I could buy a giant beanbag and put it in the middle of the living room. The possibilities were endless. However, the honeymoon phase of living alone wore off rather quickly. You see, autonomy gave me the ability to do whatever I wanted, but things slowly became less enjoyable over time. I never forget using a camping knife to eat breakfast because all of the silverware I owned was dirty or sitting in the sink waiting to be washed. I'll also never forget tiptoeing around in the living room because the floor was covered with fast food bags and pizza boxes. No one was forcing me to shower when I didn't want to, and no one was forcing me to work out when I didn't want to. The problem was, I never wanted to. Of course, I did want to lose weight. I did want to eat healthy. I did take showers, and I did want to keep the apartment clean. But because there was nothing holding me accountable to becoming anything, my autonomy was carrying me away from the goals that I intrinsically had for my life, rather than towards them. I learned that having the discipline to set up boundaries or guardrails in my life gave me the freedom to enjoy my life and growth in a way that autonomy had not. Abdu Murray, in his book Saving Truth, talks about this very idea. He writes, "While we typically understand freedom to be the power to exercise choice without constraint, as we'll soon see, freedom becomes chaotic in a system without constraint. Freedom operates at its best within the confines of the truth. Boundaries are foreign to pure autonomy, which means that truth is being sacrificed on autonomy's altar. Someone is autonomous if he is a law unto himself." Learning the difference between autonomy and actual freedom taught me that setting up guardrails and boundaries isn't just a great virtue, but it's also a necessary one. The second thing I would learn while living alone was about myself and how to focus my sights on who I wanted to be in relationship to the world and others around me. Living alone afforded me a lot of time to reflect on my past and on my life in general. That apartment became a microcosm of my own little world. It was as though another reality existed in which I could ponder, test, and process the realities of my life. And that small space was me. Beyond it was everything and everyone else. I often paced back and forth through that small apartment hallway, wondering, what was this all amounting to? How do these stories define me today? How do I relate to the world and those around me? What comes next? These were all questions I wrestled with as I spent my time alone. At this moment in my life, not only was I living alone, but I was also 30 years old. Just as I had in my early 20s, I was having another confrontation with the brevity of life. With my 20s behind me, I knew that I needed to establish who I wanted to be, not only throughout my 30s, but also throughout the rest of my life. Sure, people are constantly changing throughout their lives. However, I felt like this season of my life was a gift or an opportunity for me to know who I would be in the coming years. This would ultimately lead me to the third lesson that I would learn about life through living alone. Namely, what I needed in order to get to where I wanted to be was discipline. The first lesson I learned taught me that guardrails are an important part of life. The third lesson would ultimately teach me that the means by which I would ultimately set up those guardrails was through discipline. I've often heard it said that motivation gets you started and discipline keeps you going. That's because, unlike discipline, motivation comes and goes on a whim. There were times living alone where I did feel motivated to do something, whether it was cleaning the apartment or going to the gym. But if I'm honest, motivation was a rare occurrence. Most days I was too tired or too lazy to do those small things that I know would ultimately lead to what I wanted in my life. Most days it would be easier to just order a pizza and watch TV all night. You see, if I was going to get to where I wanted to be with my life, then I couldn't rely on motivation to get me there. Discipline, I discovered, was the only way. Craig Groeschel talks about this idea in his book, The Power of Change. He says this: discipline is choosing what you want most over what you want now. There's always something we want now. That now desire is seductive because it promises instant gratification. But those promises are rarely delivered. There is also something we want most. That most desire rarely provides instant gratification, but it offers you something far more important, the life you want to live. Discipline is choosing what you want most over what you want now. What I wanted most was to build something for my future. I wanted to grow in my vocational skills as a video editor. I wanted to live a healthy and fit life. I wanted to find a spouse. I wanted to own a home someday. What I wanted in the moment was to do nothing. It was the more comfortable and easier decision. But I knew that only difficult decisions would ultimately lead me to where I wanted to be. Sure, those decisions were hard in the moment, but I knew that there would be a reward for them in the end. To this day, I'm still learning to make those harder decisions, and I'm already thankful and blessed for the hard decisions I have already made. Living alone gave me the space I needed to process my life, discover who I wanted to be, and equip me with the tools I needed in order to pursue that goal. That said, living alone isn't for everyone. I was only able to thrive on my own because I had learned the utter importance of community in past seasons of my life. That community kept me afloat at points where I felt like I was sinking. I've learned some of life's most important lessons through experience, and living alone was the experience I needed. Living alone doesn't mean you need to be alone. I needed a good community in my life to keep me accountable to myself. Sometimes I was so starved for company that I fell into bad company, and I paid the price. But being on your own, stripping those support beams from your life, gives you the chance to define who you really are. I don't know where you're at in your life or what kind of lessons life has taught you so far, but as I sat on my couch writing this script, I began feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the season of my life when I lived alone. My hope in sharing with you what I learned over those years is that for those called to live alone, someday you too might be filled with a sense of gratitude for the season given to you.